Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ian Roth. Ian is an active duty U.S. Army officer who has been leading teams for the past 15 years in both the military and in the civilian sectors. He writes about leadership issues and has a new book coming out in January called Shut Up and Lead: How to Speak Softly and Carry a Big Stick in a Loud and Obnoxious World, which I love the title of. And so I wanted to get him on the show and talk about this new book and his views about how to be effective as a leader in a world that is loud and obnoxious. So Ian, welcome to the show.
John, thanks for having me. I'm glad you find some humor in the title. I tend to be a sarcastic person, but the title just resonates with me, and it sounds just kind of from your reaction that it resonates with you too.
Well, I am a veteran, and I speak fluent sarcasm. So yeah, maybe that's why it resonates.
That's the true sign of a real veteran, is the sarcastic language that we share among one another.
Absolutely. Yes. 100%. So, maybe we'll start off, talk to us a little bit about why you joined the Army in the beginning and kind of some of the things you did in the Army. And I know you spent 9 months in Afghanistan as well as part of your service so far. So tell us a little bit about, why did you join and what kind of things have you done so far?
So what made me join, wanted to be an Air Force fighter pilot. I think after seeing Top Gun, first Top Gun, which isn't even the Air Force. Like, I want to fly jets. And my dad was like, yeah, that'd be great to do. So I wanted to go to school, and they said, we can't give you free school. And the Army building next door was like, we can give you free school. So I'm like, Dad, I think I'm going to go with those guys. But all kidding aside, I was 12 years old when 9/11 happened. I remember watching it happen, the second tower live on TV. And that was the moment I knew that I wanted to serve my country in whatever capacity they would allow me to do that. So from that point onward, I knew I wanted to have some sort of career in the military. Did Army ROTC at Ohio University, 4-year program, commissioned as a second lieutenant into the National Guard, was in the National Guard Army Reserve for about 8.5 years. And in 2017, the Army opened up the floodgates and said, hey, we need some officers. I applied to what's called the Call to Active Duty program, was accepted, and went into active duty service with the 101st Airborne Division in 2017. So a little bit about the reason why I wanted to join. It's been an absolute blast so far. Of course, some jobs are a lot cooler and more fun than others, but it's been a great experience. I have no regrets. I just wish I would have went the active route sooner.
Okay. Yeah. Did you see much of a difference when you went from reserve to active duty?
It's night and day. It's like two different languages.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, very good. And when did you start developing a passion towards leadership and communication?
I think I always had a passion for leadership, as I was like in leadership positions on high school sports and throughout our ROTC program. But the more I read about it in books and nonfiction books, and when I went for my MBA and started taking like some graduate level management courses, it's like, oh my goodness, there's a million different ways to skin the cat and manage and lead. So I started diving into some of those reasons. I had some astounding professors that were very thought-provoking and encouraged some conversation in class, and just became an interest of mine throughout school. And then of course, going into the military, seeing those different things put into practice. Some of them are great, some of them were poor. In addition to some of the civilian experiences I've had with leaders, I'm like, this is really, it's just fascinating. It's like, there's such it's an art and a science, but like the science behind it is just like, there's really no right answer. There's like different degrees of right answers. What's the most right answer? What's the most wrong answer? It just fascinated me that way.
Yeah. I liken it to chess in a way. It's like the concepts are basic. You can learn the basics in a day, but it takes a lifetime to master because it's you're dealing with people, and people are, essentially, they're unpredictable. So you're dealing with all sorts of different issues. And there's so many facets to leadership. So there's 15,000 books been written on leadership. So we're always trying to understand this thing, but it's a lifetime. I've been leading for 33 years, and I'm still learning every day. I'm learning something. And so, it's fascinating that, like you said, every book, every video, every podcast, there's like one new facet of that gem that you didn't know about, and you're just like, wow, that's another tool in the toolbox, or that's something I need to try, or that's something that I didn't even realize I was doing. So yeah, it's a constant lifetime of learning. Now for you, like, when did you decide, like, well, I'm gonna start writing about it? Like, you started a newsletter, you started getting active on social media. Like, that's a conscious decision when you say, like, I'm going to start writing on leadership issues. What was the trigger for you, or why did you say, you know what, I'm going to start writing about these subjects?
So I know I've always wanted to write a book, and I've never really enjoyed something so much as to being able to go from start to finish in written format to write a book about it. And it was a conversation I had with one of my friends, Mike. We were talking about leadership, and he's like, "Dude, you should just write a book about this." I'm like, "Man, I don't think I can. Like, there's no way. Me write a book? Are you kidding me?" And then as we were talking through it, I came to the realization, like, holy crap, yeah, I think I can. I think
Mhm.
there's far less qualified people who have written books on leadership and other things. Like, so why not me? I had to get over that imposter syndrome. And I made the decision, like, okay, I'm gonna commit to this. And worst thing that happens, nobody reads it and it stinks and it tanks. Like, I still wrote a book. It's a good example for my kids that they can go on Amazon when I'm 70, 80 years old, and my grandkids, et cetera. Like, look, there's dad, there's grandpa. He wrote a book. He left his legacy on the world. And I can go into what his head was and what he was thinking at that time and who he was as a man, as a leader, just by reading this. So
Mhm.
as tacky as it sounds, doing it for my kids, I think was a big factor.
I think it's really just a really good motivation. I know a good friend of mine. I've known him. We've worked together for years, and his dad wrote a book, like back, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago. Wrote a book,
Wow.
and I always thought that was really cool. And he had copies of it. He had like 20 copies that he always had around, and I was always fascinated. Like, your dad wrote a book. How cool is
Right,
that?
right, right.
And I always thought that, like, well, that would be cool to write a book someday. And but it just seemed like one of those things, like you said, that, like, well, that's what famous people do, or that's what
Yeah.
people who, college professors do, or people who are super educated. But I think when it comes to leadership, I think, all of our experiences are important to share, because I think, like you say, they add to the body of knowledge of what leadership is and what it can be. So yeah, I think it's great. I'm glad to see you're putting a book out there. 15,001 books now on leadership.
Exactly. Right. And hopefully I added something to the pie that someone can put in their toolkit. I think there's a couple nuggets in there.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. I'm sure, absolutely sure there is. So I'm looking forward to it when it comes out. So, but I have a quick question for you. You've worked, because you were in the reserves, and you went active. So you've worked some civilian jobs too. So you've seen leadership and action in the civilian side, and you saw leadership and action in the military on active duty. What were some things that you saw? Like, maybe what were some contrasts that you noticed, like, from civilian to military leadership?
So one of the big stereotypes is that all military leaders are just kind of hard slamming, putting the hammer down leaders, and civilian leaders are not. And I can tell you, at least from my experience, man, I had some jerk civilian bosses that were just toxic and terrible
Yep.
people. I'm talking about this guy, and the stories in my book. He cornered me in the warehouse I was working at, and like I thought he was going to harm me. He was saying
Oh,
things
yeah.
like, I saw what you get paid. You're not effing worth that.
Oh,
F this,
wow.
F that. And I'm just like, is this guy serious? And he was dead serious. And then, telling HR about it. And they just, yeah, we can't do anything. This guy's too high of a level in this organization for us to do anything. And then I ended up finding another job. And they're like, why are you leaving? I don't understand.
Why are
Don't you
you
like it
leaving?
here?
Yes. Yeah.
And just like the ignorance and I want to call it naivety, but like no, it was ignorance, or I don't know what the best word is.
Yeah.
Negligence probably is a better word,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
them just choosing to not do anything. So I think I've had more positive leadership experience in the military than I
Yeah.
did in the civilian world. That's not to say I met some insanely talented and servant leaders on the civilian side, because I can a handful right off the top of my head, but I've just been very blessed to be around some great thinkers who honestly care for those who work for them and put the needs of their team before their own.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting too, because I get that a lot. They say, well, you're in the military, so you're used to command and control leadership. And I'm like, no, not at all. I mean, if anything, we're in the military, we're working very close with our troops. I mean,
Yeah.
well, in a submarine, we were very close. Like we were day to day, 24/7, months at a time, like couldn't get away from them. So we had intimate relationships with the people that we work with. So, and I'm sure it's the same way on a unit, especially if you're deployed, and you're not going home every day. So you're just really close with the people you work with day in, day out, months on end. And so you develop relationships. And I think what I found in the civilian world is that a lot of guys don't develop the relationship with the people they work with, or even workers to their bosses. They go home every night. They don't, there's no, the connections are shallow. And so I do find that civilian leaders do treat people poorly because they can get away with it. They just go home
Sure.
and they can ignore that individual, right? Whereas in the military, you sort of can't get away from it, somebody, because
Right.
you're, close quarters and, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's interesting. It's the same similar observations I saw as well too. And it's funny because, it's like the Simon Sinek wrote a book, Leaders Eat Last. And it's like, well, that's kind of like what we do in the military anyway. That's kind of,
Yeah.
it's servant
That's old
leadership.
news. Old news,
Yeah,
man.
it's like, oh, we've been doing this for hundreds of years. And it's like, oh, okay, now that's like a book, like I could have wrote that book.
Yeah,
Right.
seriously.
Yeah, yeah. So your book, let's talk about that. Shut Up and Lead. Okay. So now obviously you're using in this, let me read the subtitle because I love it. It's How to Speak Softly and Carry a Big Stick in a Loud and Obnoxious World. So obviously there's a Teddy Roosevelt speak softly and carry a big stick reference in there. So why did that resonate? That philosophy resonate with you? And why do you think it's an important concept for leaders to understand?
It resonates with me because not only is Teddy Roosevelt just an awesome dude, because
Yeah.
like look at all the cool stuff he did. He was actually, in my research, I discovered he was the youngest ever president. I thought John F. Kennedy was, and he
No.
was the youngest ever elected president. But Teddy Roosevelt assumed the presidency after the assassination at a younger age than JFK did. But speak softly and carry a big stick. Just be so together, be so competent, be so squared away and good at your job and perform to that level and take care of those around you that people know that you're good. You don't need to tell them that you're good. You don't need to justify why you're asking people to do things. Like this guy knows what he's talking about. He gets results. So like, yeah, I'm going to follow him. And the speaking softly part is, if you're going to be a leader who leads by yelling and demeaning and just going after and making personal attacks on people, like people are not going to want to follow you. That borders along the lines of toxic leadership, what we call as non-productive leadership. And if you have to do that to be effective, you obviously are not doing something right. So I've seen lots of leaders who like to yell, and they may get results because strictly out of fear, people are going to do what they are being told to do, but the respect that those subordinates have for that leader is not there, and,
Yeah.
and they're gonna have resentment, and they're not going to follow because they want to. They're not truly being inspired and led. They're being led out of fear.
Mm, mm. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you nailed something right there. Is that the quiet, competent leader people naturally gravitate to, right? And I noticed that throughout my time in working in corporate America. Like I walk into a room, I automatically knew who was the leader. Everyone defers to that person, right?
Right.
And it doesn't matter what the rank is, or it doesn't matter what the position is. You notice right away when someone naturally takes the leadership position. Everyone defers to that person, but it's the quiet, competent professional that knows what they're doing. And everyone's like, like what's Joe gonna say? What does Sharon think about that? They're defaulting to that leadership position because of competency and skill, and sometimes grace under pressure, just being able to be when everyone's losing their minds, they're not,
That's right.
it's like, well, in a battle scenario, when everyone's losing their mind, look to the person that's really calm, because
Yeah.
they're thinking about the next step, right? And everyone else is losing their minds. So I think that's yeah, that's great. I mean, like you said, it's it's natural. Who the leader is. It's not rank. It's based on competency and ability. That's fantastic.
And how can one be expected to effectively lead a group of people if he can't lead himself? Like if he's
Oh
not
yeah,
leading himself in his own way. So I think that plays into it too.
yeah. That's an important aspect too, and we don't talk about it enough. But leading yourself first is really important. I think people sense when you're physically fit, you're mentally capable, you're spiritually set up, you're financially, you're if you have your, it's a friend of mine talks about leadership being on stage, and he said the other part, the most important part is to make sure the backstage is in order, right? And a lot of leaders, it's just chaos in the back, right? And then they try to get on stage and and they're messing up their lines and things because they're thinking about all the things they got messed up in backstage. But you got to get the backstage straight if you want to be good on when you're on stage. And I think self leadership is a really big part of that. So good that you brought that up as well. And
that's a great comparison. I never thought of it that way, but I'm definitely going to steal that from now on when I talk to people.
Yeah, I've always loved the analogy, because we are on stage as leaders, and if we're worried about our relationship with our wife or our kids, or we've got to lose 30 pounds, or we're not feeling good about ourselves physically, you're not going to be given 100% to your job. And I think you got to take those steps, and you have to have that discipline to take care of yourself, lead yourself first, and that's a big part of it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you read my book already?
No, not yet.
I'm like, oh my goodness, you're hitting like a lot of these things. I don't know if somebody leaked it to you, man. Oh my goodness.
I know, but I figured you're into fitness, so I think this part of it. So
yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. So what do you mean when you say we're in a loud and obnoxious world? I kind of think I know what it means, but what do you mean by that?
So the introduction to my book is, I sat down and I just like brain dumped all this stuff onto the paper, and it was like about how I think social media as a whole, and generally speaking, has been detrimental to leadership, to, I mean, quite frankly, humanity, and how we see so many people, and again, it doesn't apply to everybody, but if you're thinking, does this apply to me? It might apply to you, of people out there on social media just so loud and obnoxious, and oftentimes they have nothing to back it up with. They're these empty threats. They're these anonymous accounts on social media who just make all these obnoxious claims with nothing to back it up. Do we want to be those kinds of leaders? Do we want to use those folks as examples for how we want to lead in our lives? I don't think so. We want to have the competence so that when somebody comes to us for help, that we can deliver and help that person. And we're not just flapping our gums about how great we think we are or this and that. We're doing more than we're talking about it.
Yeah, I agree with you a lot. In fact, that's one of the areas I struggle as an author and someone who's trying to teach and help people in leadership. The people that I work with, they're like, well, you got to put your face out there more. You got to get more videos and more. And my view of leadership is not the only it's not about me. It's about my people,
Right.
and it's elevating them. And so it always feels weird to me putting my face in there. Look at me, look how great I am. But we do celebrate that in social media, in society in general, right? The person that's up, in your face, and
always
their face is always on a video, the influencers and
right.
and all these people that I look sometimes at the just people, these Instagram models or whatever, and you look on their accounts and they have like 10 million followers. You're like, she just takes bikini pictures. What is going on here? And then people trying to teach and train on things that are vital towards business and society in general. We're struggling to get our numbers up, right? But you do a little TikTok dance and you're like million views.
And then you can become a life coach right after that. You just self-professed life coach and coach people twice your age on how to succeed and crush it at life. You're on the same sheet of music that I am. Totally.
Yeah, it's a frustration that I see as well too. So yeah, interesting. One thing was interesting, the way you wrote the book, you were very public about it. So you on Twitter, you post like where you're at, how many words you'd written, and you were kind of and you actually allow people to see like rough drafts, right? I think if they sign up for your newsletter, you can see rough drafts of the book. Is
Right.
that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about why you chose to do it. That very public, like I'm going to write a book and you're going to go along the journey with me. And I think that's a really interesting way to do it.
So I did it for a few reasons. First, I wanted to inspire people
Mm.
to who are maybe thinking about writing a book. Maybe they think they have some things to say, and maybe I could write a book, maybe I can't. And like, look, you're looking at a dude that has like, I'm not the life coach. I don't have 20 million followers on Instagram. Like,
What?
I'm just a normal guy, and like I'm gonna try this and see if it works. I'll share my trials and tribulations and successes, and maybe I can help you out. If not, that's fine. Or maybe I can inspire you to write a book. That would be great.
Mm.
And another reason was I wanted to paint a holistic picture of leadership for the readers for the final draft of the book. So the way I did it, I used Substack for my newsletter. And when I publish the rough draft sections, it's kind of like a blog, like an old school blog
Mm.
from 10, 15 years ago. People can comment on there, people can post, people can like and all that stuff. And I said, hey, share your stories if you've
Yeah.
had anything similar like this happen to you, because I don't want it to be just a military book where here's this army guy talking about all army things, and
Yep.
that'll turn off 99% of the population who was not in the military. So I didn't want to
Right.
do that. So in addition to pulling in some of my civilian experiences, I wanted to share the experiences of some of the people who were going along on the journey with me. A lot of people graciously shared some of their experiences, and you'll see those examples and stories scattered throughout the book.
That's really cool. So it's almost like you're crowdsourcing a book, in a way. You've got a subject matter, like a certain, thing you're talking about. Like, hey, have you had these experiences in the past? In your past, you hear these stories, you put it together, and now it's almost like crowdsourcing, the content in a book. Very interesting.
Yeah, and kind of out of humility, and I try to make it very obvious. Like, I'm not the leadership expert. I've learned some
Mm.
things, and maybe I'm further along on my journey than you are, but there's thousands, tens of thousands of people that are further along than I am. So I'm not the expert. Maybe you know some things reading my newsletter that I don't know. Hey, bring it to the table. Let's talk about
Mm.
it, and maybe put it in the book to get some other people a different point of view.
I love that you said that because that's something I struggle with, and actually I don't like the words expert and guru, right? And I get that a lot when I'm on podcasts. Oh, John Rennie's a leadership expert. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm a student of leadership, but I am not an expert in any way, shape, or form. And I'm learning every day, just like anybody else. I think the great leaders are humble enough to know that they are not an expert, and they are willing to listen to new ideas and listen to their people, and and have the right mindset that I don't know everything, but
Yeah.
there are things for me to learn. So I like that you say I'm not a leadership expert, but that's the kind of book I want to read, is someone that is on a journey, and here's where I'm at so far, here's what I've learned, and I have a long way to go, and I
Right.
think that's always been my approach. And so I kind of cringe when they get introduced as, John Rennie, leadership expert. Like, really expert. I mean, like, experienced, sure,
Sure.
but
Right.
expert, I don't know about that. So yeah, that's interesting. I love that. Now, one of the things, I mean, you touched on it, what we talked about earlier, but this idea of competence, and people gravitate towards the competent people. And, you saw that in the military. I saw that in the military. I saw that in my civilian career. Sometimes we think it's about people, or it's about plans, or it's about our vision that's really important. But, at the end of the day, people won't follow you unless you're competent, unless you have skill in the area of which you're leading in. So talk a little bit about the importance of competence.
Yeah, just like you said, John, you have to know what you're doing if you're going to expect other people to follow you in that field or hold them to a standard. How can you hold someone else to a standard in a subject if like you don't know what the heck you're even talking about? So, and then kind of like what we talked about, if you can't lead yourself, or if you don't know what you're doing, how can you
Yeah.
tell others what they should be doing? So just kind of those two things.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think I know as a junior officer when I first arrived on the submarine, I was not competent. I was the Navy felt I was ready for the fleet, but I surrounded myself with, my team had more years in the service and had more experience than I did and more education than I did. So how do you lead people when you're the least competent? Well, you better get competent quickly, and so there was definitely pressure to become valuable to the team. And I think that so leaders, if you're in a position where you are not a subject matter expert, you should be relying on your subject matter experts, but also and you should be listening more than you're talking, but you also need to be learning quickly so that you can get the respect of your team, because they won't respect you if they see that you're not competent, right? And that's a big part of it.
Yeah, and I think in our examples for the military, I mean, we get commissioned as officers and know nothing. We're essentially
Right, right.
glorified privates, or
Yeah, yeah,
I always forget the Navy ranks, but glorified E1s as we're
yeah,
O1s,
yeah.
and we have those senior NCOs or
Yep.
chiefs around us that have been doing their job in that field longer than we've been alive, quite frankly. Like you'll
Yeah.
have some NCOs that have been doing it for 20 plus years, and you need to get with them, leverage those around you. And just because you're a leader doesn't mean you need to know all of the answers, but you need to know where to go to find them. So
Yes. Yeah.
leveraging those people, having them train you up, get up to speed as quickly as possible, and then you're leading from that position of competence. Hey, mentorship goes both ways. You can be mentored
Yes.
by your subordinates as you should to your subordinates.
Yes. That's a big nugget right there, people. If you're listening in, mentorship goes both ways. Absolutely. I learned so much from, my first chief petty officer was in the, had been in the Navy about as many years as I've been alive when I showed
Right.
up to the boat. Like, how am I not going to listen to that guy?
Seriously.
Right. You chief, keep me out of trouble.
Right.
Basically. Right. So yeah, I might outrank you, but you have much more knowledge in this than I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it takes humility to do that, because the officers that didn't do that found themselves in trouble because they weren't humble enough to say, I'm willing to listen and learn from someone that I outrank. Yeah.
And then those subordinates with all the knowledge, they see that and they just kind of let that person go out and float on
Oh
their
yeah.
own island. And then, hey, not a team player. Okay, roger that, sir. And then does not usually bode well for that person.
No, not at all. So absolutely. So you say you also talk about trust and professionalism, and those are two big characteristics you have to have as a leader as well. Talk a little bit about that.
So for trust, kind of get into it a little bit. There's different ways to go about trust in a leadership role. There's some leaders who give their undying 100% trust immediately, and then often, they might get burned. And then there's people that say, you should never do that. You should come in and say, you have to earn my trust, and kind
Mm,
of start at the opposite spectrum. And then what I pose in the book is say, come in somewhere in the middle, 50-50.
yeah.
Allow and empower your subordinates and trust them to a certain degree. But then the second part of that, which is vital, is to verify.
Yeah.
And as they show a pattern of continuing to do that successfully, just kind of give them more and more and more trust. Whereas you're just circling back, or maybe they're back briefing you once a day, once every other day, of what they're at, where they're at, what they didn't do, what they owe you, and update accordingly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if someone fails to meet that, then it goes the other way. I need to check on you more and more.
Yeah.
And then you get into kind of like a micromanaging position. Last thing you want to do, and that's unfortunately, you need to start doing the counseling of, hey, here's the standards, you're not meeting my standards, et cetera, that way. So that's how I talk about trust in the book.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. I tend to go into it with a full glass. I think of it as glass of water. I'll give you a full glass of water when I meet you. Right. That's just how I am. I'm wired that way. And I just assume you filled the glass up. And then over time I see if your actions are consistent with that full glass of water. And what I find is some people drain the water very quickly, and that's a problem, right? So and others are like, oh, this is someone I can trust. This is someone that does what they say they're going to do, and that's vital to me. It's actually my number one expectation. Do what you say you're going to do to my employees. I say, do what you say you're going to do. That makes it easy. If you say you're going to do something, it gets done, and
Right.
that's a really nice way it's a great employee that does what he says they're going to do, he or she. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So you also say, obviously, integrity is essential. Why is that?
Integrity, I look at that as similar to trust, doing what you say you're going to do. And as a leader, more so when I'm talking with my subordinates, obviously it goes with my supervisor too. But if I say that I'm going to do something for you, team, or
Yeah.
go to the plate for you, go to bat for you, or fight for resources for you, I'm going to do that. And I'm
Mhm.
going to, if that means I have to have a hard conversation with my boss to fight for my team, I'm going to do that for my team because I'm looking out for my team and protecting them. Of course, I would have that conversation respectfully, but building that trust and being a person of my word with my team is one of the biggest ways to build that trust in me as their leader. And then that would go the other way too. They would see a leader doing that. Wow, this leader really has my back. I'm going to go above and beyond for
Mhm.
this guy or girl.
Yeah, absolutely essential. Yeah, very good. So, like, there's a lot of books on leadership. What do you think is sort of like the unique thing people are going to take away when they read this book?
The unique thing, so I mentioned at the beginning the five pillars of big stick leadership from 1900 when Teddy
Yeah.
Roosevelt was in leadership, and I tweaked them a little bit to change them up a little bit and make them relevant for today. So there's still five principles. We mentioned some of them. I don't want to give them all away here because I want
Yes.
to leave a little carrot dangling, but I think it's a pretty unique and interesting way to take such an old philosophy that was written, at the beginning of the 20th century, before social media, internet, cars, mainstream electricity, I think, and all that stuff, and apply it to a world in 2022 when we have like all that stuff and more. So I think readers will find that interesting, and more importantly, I hope they can take some pieces of advice and maybe learn from some of my stories and put them into practice in their lives.
That's fantastic. And I'm interested to see if this 100-year-old philosophy stands the test of time. So that'll be interesting. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, when does the book come out?
Comes out on January 6th.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so we're a little bit out, but I want to polish it up a little bit more. And quite honestly, I didn't know how long the process was going to take because I've never written a book before. So I'm like, I'm going to give myself plenty of time so I can do it. Under promise, over deliver. It's going to be worth the wait.
Outstanding. So, and it is available for pre-order, as I understand it, right?
It is available for pre-order on Amazon. So get the ebook now. Unfortunately, the paperback I cannot set up with pre-order for them on
Yeah.
Amazon,
Yeah.
but there will be a paperback available when the book goes live on January 6th.
Okay. Well, very good. How can people find out more about you, this book, and also we didn't mention, but your newsletter?
Yeah, so to find out about what I have going on, there are three main things, all of which you can check out. Go to ianmroth.com, ianmroth.com. I had two short names, so it's really easy to remember. Even my kids can do that on their little iPads. But on there, you'll see the newsletter. That's one of the main buttons on there. It's a Substack newsletter. Subscribe to the newsletter. You'll get to see a rough draft of the book, can engage with the sections and chapters of the book and see the book as it came out of my brain the first time onto paper, kind of rough and unpolished, but I think it was a good exercise, and I got a lot of good feedback from people who have read it. So there's the newsletter. Follow me on Twitter. I do drop a lot of hints about my book. That's at therealroth.com. The Real Roth, ROTH, kind of like the IRA. And then the third way is to go on Amazon and pre-order the book. There's a description on there, goes a little bit more into what the book's about. And if you think that's something that interests you, hit that pre-order button and I would be forever grateful.
Okay, fantastic. We're going to put links in the show notes for all those resources so you don't have to write it if you're driving right now. So we'll do that. So let me just encourage all of you to take a look at this book. It's called Shut Up and Lead: How to Speak Softly and Carry a Big Stick in a Loud and Obnoxious World. Uh, Ian, this has been wonderful having you on the show. Thank you for coming on the show, sharing this new book, sharing your philosophy, and helping us bridge the gap for 100-year-old philosophy, bringing it into the future. This is really exciting. Thanks for being on the show.
John, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And as always, I love seeing your stuff and listening to your shows on here. So keep up the good work, man.
I will. Thank you very much. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.